Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Richard Staley. I am the Policy Administrative Assistant for WPSGHA. We do have several medical directors on file with us. Dr. Shaning is not able to connect with the meeting at this time. I have his talking points. And as soon as one of the medical directors also is available with his talking points, they can jump in. But for the time being, I'd like to introduce you to the meeting. Today is May 22nd, 2024. It's 1:10 p.m., so we are running a tight schedule and we're a little bit behind. This is the WPSGHA Ad Hoc Draft Local Coverage Determination open meeting. And I will be turning things over to Dr. Claudia Campos, the CMD.
Thank you, Rich. Good afternoon. Thank you for participating in the WPS open meeting on skin substitute grafts, cellular, and tissue-based products for the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. This meeting provides an opportunity for stakeholders to recommend changes, submit additional evidence for consideration, and present concerns regarding a proposed policy. This is also an opportunity for the MACs to ensure understanding of the LCD within the stakeholder community. We appreciate all who are participating and your efforts to follow the LCD process to provide feedback to us on this important topic. When we read some of the comments received and the presentations that will be given today, we identified there are some misunderstandings and some questions which I can offer the following clarifications in advance. Stakeholder input from the previous proposed LCD was strongly considered in the development of this proposed LCD. There were multiple stakeholder meetings as well as previous public listening sessions. The LCD is inclusive of societal guidelines, which are summarized in the societal input section of the proposed LCD. The LCD aligns with 4 out of 5 of the guidelines detailed in the policy. The only recommendations that the LCD does not follow utilize a less robust methodology for grading of the evidence. There are no pathways for coverage in the proposed LCD based on FDA regulatory processes. The policy intentionally does not limit consideration for coverage to specific study designs to allow investigators multiple options for future investigations. An episode of skin replacement therapy, as defined in the policy, is 12 weeks from the first application of a skin substitute graft CPT. While the policy does limit frequency of applications to 4, there is a clear pathway for use of additional applications for time when medically necessary. The policy addresses PFUs and VLUs and the use of skin substitutes or CPTs outside of this diagnosis are at my discretion. Since this is an evidence-based policy, all future evidence must be submitted through the LCD reconsideration process. MACs cannot add new codes that expand coverage to the billing and coding article without going through the process. All efforts will be made to review new literature and add codes in a timely manner. Any literature that was not included in the evidence review or new literature that has been published can be submitted to the MACs during the open comment period for consideration. Literature must be published in a peer-reviewed journal. The comment period is open until 6/8/24, and response to comments will be published with the final LCD. We hope this provides clarification in the interim regarding the intent of the policy to ensure understanding as we continue to work with you, the provider and stakeholder community, to provide the best quality care to the Medicare beneficiaries. And now, the presentations. Each presentation will be allotted up to 8 minutes. If a previous speaker has already made your point, simply state that you agree. We would like to give everyone an opportunity to speak. Dr. Christy Bakley is next. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, and thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Geislick at today's open meeting. My name is Christy Blakely, and I am an employee at Geislick. Next slide, please. Here is my conflict of interest disclosure, and as previously stated, I am an employee of Geislick Pharma AG. Next slide, please. Geislick applauds reevaluating the LCD for skin substitute grafts, cellular and tissue-based products for the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. Today, I would like to request reconsideration for coverage of Geislick Dermaguide, HCPCS code Q4203, in the proposed LCD. In the draft LCD, the Geislick Dermaguide was listed in Table 2 as a non-covered product with no literature identified. This reconsideration request is based on the recent publication of Level 1 clinical evidence in a 105-patient prospective randomized controlled trial. In the publication, the Geislick Dermaguide was referred to as PRBM, or Purified Reconstituted Bilayer Membrane, which is the generic descriptor of the product technology. You can see in the screenshot from the publication on the right that PRBM is branded in the US as Geislick Dermaguide and processed by Geislick Pharma AG in Switzerland. Next slide, please. The clinical study team includes Dr. David Armstrong, Charles Ellen, and others as listed here. Next slide, please. The results of this prospective randomized controlled trial demonstrate that Dermaguide is highly effective in the treatment of chronic diabetic foot ulcers, showing 85 to 92% closure rate at 12 weeks, with a percent area reduction of 93.6%. This is compared to standard of care alone of 45 to 67% closure rate at 12 weeks. Next slide, please. In addition to the statistically significant improvement in wound closure, the Dermaguide also demonstrated favorable health economic outcomes as compared to similarly published data on other technologies that are covered by CMS. The mean graft to closure showed the lowest cost of comparable technologies with cost data published. Next slide, please. In addition to our 105 patient RCT, additional publications include a 40 patient interim analysis of the prospective RCT, a 10 patient observational series, a 10 patient retrospective series including deep wounds, and a material characterization manuscript demonstrating the mechanism of action. Next slide, please. In summary, Geislick requests reconsideration for coverage of Dermaguide, HCPCS code Q4203, in the proposed LCD for skin substitute grafts, cellular and tissue-based products for the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers, based upon the publication of Level 1 clinical evidence in a prospective randomized controlled trial. Geislick prioritizes clinical evidence to support our technologies and is pleased to see solid outcomes and improved wound healing for patients suffering from chronic diabetic foot ulcers. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Blakely. Dr. Carolina Busthoff from Molecular is next.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to present at this meeting where I'll briefly outline how our device can be a part of supporting the implementation of the draft LCD while helping all stakeholders. I represent Moleculite, a company that produces and commercializes a handheld imaging device by the same name. We present a unique platform that is being used right now across the United States to enhance wound care, and this includes the application of skin substitutes. Next slide, please. Our company believes that we should be part of the conversation because our device supports and improves upon the documentation requirements that are outlined in this draft LCD. For example, if you go to the next slide, please. Our diagnostic imaging modality has been designed to integrate seamlessly into a clinical workflow while documenting the various aspects of treatment. This will include the documentation of the failure to respond of the VLUs and DFUs after the 4 weeks of standard of care treatment. That is a requirement before the application of a skin substitute. Next slide. Our device enables an unbiased documentation of the appropriately performed wound bed preparation and the control of the infection prior to the application of the CTP. We have published best practice guidelines that are available to help clinicians in the appropriate use of the device for that specific purpose. Next slide. Moleculite bacterial imaging also supports adequate patient selection, avoiding placing CTPs on actively infected or heavily colonized wounds. And it supports a more accurate wound sizing that leads to a better match between the wound size and the CTP sizes available. What is Moleculite exactly? Well, we are an FDA-cleared Class 2 device with 2 distinct functions. We have one function that provides bedside bacterial detection with a demonstrated 4 times greater sensitivity than the standard of care in detecting heavily colonized or infected wounds. And the second feature is a digital wound measurement feature with over 95% accuracy. Bacterial detection is accomplished through a non-invasive, non-contact, and non-contrast fluorescence imaging technology. This means that it is completely safe to be used on all patients. The images you see on this slide is what the provider sees on the display screen of the device when treating a wound. So on the left-hand side, you see an example of what we call a cyan signal at the very top of that wound. And this indicates to the provider that there are Pseudomonas present at concentrations that would cause healing delays or infection. And on the right side, you see a red signal in the center of that wound. This is indicative of a variety of bacterial species at pathogenic concentrations again. So what this does is allows the providers to identify and locate bacteria, enabling its effective and objective removal and setting up the stage for a CTP to thrive in a clean wound bed. Next slide, please. The information from both the bacterial detection and the digital wound measurement feature, which you see here on this slide, is collected and stored in a cyber-secure, HIPAA-compliant manner, and the information can be revisited at any time. So both the wound's clinical evolution and its size are being tracked over time, objectively, and in a standardized, visual, really undisputable way. Next slide, please. It is also important to highlight that our technology works equally well on all skin tones and races. And this is something important to highlight because not all skin diagnostics can do that, can make that claim. So we are really supporting the CMS's initiative to provide more equitable care across the US. Next slide, please. And I'll skip this one for time. Next slide, please. So just as a summary, we believe that we present a solution for the multiple stakeholders involved or impacted by the proposed LCD. We support a 28-day medical necessity documentation versus standard of care before applying a CTP. We support the medical necessity verification and sequencing of allowed CTPs. The device is able to demonstrate the adequacy of chosen treatments and wound bed preparation objectively ahead of a CTP application. There is visual testimony pre and post wound bed preparation, pre and post debridement of bacterial presence, for example. The providers can use Moleculite to achieve better wound bed preparation, ensuring that the CTPs are being given a better chance of success. The digital wound measurement feature provides a standardized visual record for the payers that this wound size is being reasonably corresponds to the chosen CTP. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So in summary, we believe our technology really enhances the documentation, but also the appropriate use of CTPs, which allows providers to objectively demonstrate medical necessity to the payers, supports the required documentation efficiently. It satisfies the payers' expectations and reassures the providers that their work will be adequately reimbursed. We would like to respectfully request further dialogue to include the fluorescence imaging and digital wound measurement features provided through the Moleculite device in this draft LCD. I thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Wusthof. Jeffrey Nisgoda from Kent Imaging is next.
Dr. Nisgoda, are you available? Okay, I would suggest we move to the next presentation then.
So next we have Gunnar Johansson from Kerecis.
Dr. Johansson, are you available? Okay. Dr. Johansson is available. It looks like he made it on the attendees. Let me find him and promote him.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Johansson, you are now a panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you very much for finding me on the list. Gunnar Johansson here, Medical Director at Kerecis. Very thankful for the opportunity to speak with you all. And we just want to start by thanking the MACs and WPS for their evidence-based focus, and we're looking forward to seeing this LCD evolve. What I'm going to focus our comments on is the late addition of a study that was published last year by Lantis in 2023 that was not included in the literature, it seems. And I'll go over that study. Kerecis is part of the Alliance of Wound Care Stakeholders and of AdvoMed, and we support also their comments that they might have on the general execution of the LCD. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I'm Medical Director at Kerecis, and I am a salaried employee at Kerecis. Next slide, please. A quick introduction on Kerecis. Kerecis is an Icelandic private company held by Coloplast. We have a series of FDA 510(k) products that are animal derived, and the key products that are the subject of the study that we're talking about and the LCD here are the Q4158 Merigen and A2019 Merigen Shield. And they are both the intact fish skin grafts that we will be talking about, and you can see examples of them below. Next slide, please. The data that was included in the literature review was considered not complete for the review, and they included 2 studies. 2021 study on interim analysis on diabetic foot ulcers, and an acute wound study from 2019 by Kirsner, and those had some limitations and not the right indication, so that did not fit into the LCD criteria. But we have new data that was not reviewed, it seems. That is the Lantis 2023 study. That was a multi-center randomized controlled trial on 102 patients, and the key reasons why we think that will be of interest to the MAC is that this fulfills all the clinical evidence criteria listed in the LCD. It is the full study publication with the outcome data. It has a lot larger sample size, and it has a long-term follow-up, which is a comment that was mentioned in the LCD that was missing from many of the studies. Next slide, please. And to give a highlight of the study, this is a peer-reviewed publication with a ID and index. It is a randomized controlled trial comparing the fish skin graft to standard of care in diabetic foot ulcers. And the key attributes that we think will be of importance in evaluating it is the rigorous methodology with a well-defined and clinically relevant inclusion-exclusion criteria, appropriate standard of care comparator, rigorous statistical analysis with both intent to treat and per protocol populations, robust randomized controlled design with adequate power, independent, blinded adjudication of healing outcomes, 12-week outcome with a 12-month follow-up, clinically meaningful and statistically significant improvements, reasonable safety profile with no product-related serious adverse events, and the recent publication ensures that the data is highly relevant to current clinical practice. The main weaknesses that might be identified is that, like mentioned in the LCD, most of these studies are going to be industry funded, like this study was, but that is in line with other drug discovery or new products. There is not much other mechanism for having a non-industry funded RCTs, so we hope that is acceptable. And the study was performed during COVID, so there was patient dropout, but by using both intent to treat analysis and last observation carried forward, we expect that explains away that. Next slide, please. And by reviewing the three criteria listed, the product characteristics clearly Kerecis fulfills those. The clinical evidence qualifier, our level 1 study, level 1 evidence study provides the high quality evidence required. And the qualifier
on that symposium.
Next slide, please. And just for comparison, we just wanted to see because it wasn't explicitly defined what was the minimum requirement or a baseline of the evidence qualification. We just wanted to highlight many of the studies that were included in the evidence review either had smaller sample sizes or had identified a high risk of bias or some risk of bias. And we expect that Kerecis overcomes the same basic hurdles as these studies and might even exceed them in most. Next slide, please. So the impact of including the study in the LCD review, we think that this would strengthen the evidence base for the LCD and including fish skin grafts for the diabetic foot ulcer treatment. It provides additional context for the product's efficacy and safety and supports coverage for promising advanced therapy backed by high quality clinical data. And by omitting the study or not including it, we think this would limit access of the Medicare beneficiary to newly published evidence and omits option to patients that might not want human, pig, cow sourced products for cultural or religious reasons. And we urge WPS to consider this new publication and to make sure that there is an applicable pathway for new studies. And we heard in the introduction that the reconsideration process would be the main avenue for new study. And
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. And we hope that process will not be too drawn out. Kerecis has, for example, in review a publication on deeper diabetic foot ulcers that are University of Texas grade 2 or 3 that penetrate to bone, tendon, or joint, that is currently not included as a diagnosis. And we hope that when new evidence comes for those studies, that there will be an opportunity to rapidly give coverage for those patients in need. But we thank WPF for the opportunity and for the clear process.
Thank you, Dr. Johansson. Dr. Andrew Rader is next.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Rader. I'm a doctor of podiatric medicine, and I serve as medical director at Memorial Hospital's Wound Care Center in Huntingburg, Indiana, where we specialize in the treatment of non-healing wounds, including diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. We also provide care through our private offices due to the rural nature of our practice. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my views on the proposed local coverage decision limiting Medicare coverage of skin substitutes used in the treatment of venous leg ulcers and diabetic foot ulcers. I am concerned to see that the proposed LCD would so dramatically truncate options for both providers and their patients in the use of the skin substitute products, though. I don't think that a cutoff of Medicare coverage of skin substitutes to only a little more than a dozen older products with RCT evidence acceptable to WPS is wise or justified. This potentially sets, I think, a dangerous precedent requiring RCT evidence for any approved skin substitute, effectively quashing further innovation that is in response to scientific discovery. This would be akin to only approving surgeries with RCT evidence, where to date only a small fraction of surgeries performed have this level of evidence or support their use. Appendectomies, for example, do not have this level of evidence, yet save countless lives every month. It's an extremely serious decision to limit the skin substitute in this way. It would prevent me from using products that, based on science, I believe are best for my patients. I'm certain this will place many other professionals who struggle with these wounds in a similar situation. I think that significantly more input from providers, patients, and experts should have been sought before introducing this proposal. For example, in my practice, I use a product called InnovaMatrix. This device is unique in that it utilizes porcine placental tissue and a process that, very importantly, effectively cleanses residual cellular material to create a medium that mitigates the immune response while supporting effective tissue growth. This has been successful where other products that are on the list have failed for my patients. This device is predicated on an earlier porcine-derived product that has at least 6 clinical trials demonstrating effectiveness, but it would now be excluded because it does not have its own trial. Excluding products such as this with clear real-world evidence and a sound basis for FDA approval is not in the best interest of patients, I think. In addition to stifling continued medical innovation, this will likely extend the course of treatment for many patients. The consequence of this is more complications, including amputation, in the Medicare population suffering from diabetes. This population is disproportionately individuals from under-resourced communities challenged by a myriad of social risk factors. It ignores many other sources of information that demonstrate efficacy, including real-world evidence found in retrospective studies, as well as peer-reviewed scientific literature. This includes a very large study utilizing Medicare data from 2015 to 2018 showing effectiveness and reductions in amputations and readmissions. With regard to limitations on the number of applications in a 12-week episode period, I do appreciate that the proposed LCD moves away from the hard stop at 4 that was previously proposed. That is in more alignment with the published research, and I do appreciate the need to articulate some limits on applications. As now written, the LCD allows for exceptional cases in which 4 applications do not result in, quote, adequate healing. In such situations, additional applications would be considered with documentation of progress on wound closure and the medical necessity of additional applications. What's needed here for providers and patients is more specificity as to what documentation would be required, what amount of progress would be expected to justify additional applications, and how the size of the wounds would be taken into consideration. Without this guidance, providers such as myself would be proceeding in an information vacuum. Thank you again for the opportunity to present to my MAC.
Thank you, Dr. Rader.
Thank you. And Dr. Shading, I do see that you are available now.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Rich. Let Dr. Campos continue. Just wanted to make note that we didn't specify that we require randomized control trials on the evidence of the LCD, and that was one of our talking points. But let Dr. Campos continue with the meeting, and at the end I will give my comments. Thank you.
Dr. Thomas Serena from STEAM Labs is next. Thank you.
Dr. Serena, are you available? Okay, I think we should continue with the next presentation, and we will circle back. If Dr. Serena or Dr. Aniz Goda become available, please send me something in the chat or through email.
Our next presenter is Debbie Woody Vitale from Biotissue.
Hi, I'm Dr. Debbie Woody Vitale. I am board certified by the American Board of Podiatric Surgery in 2006, recertified in 2015. I also am a physician certified in wound care by the Council of Medical Education and Testing. That certification was obtained in 2009. I am a previous fellow of the American Professional Wound Care Association. Next slide, please. I have no speaking complex report. I am speaking on behalf of Biotissue. Next slide, please. So Neonex cryopreserved amniotic tissues are part of the Biotissue portfolio of products. They have been used for 38 years. They are previously most commonly have been reported for use in grafts of corneal ulcers and other conditions. They have a long history of successful use with multiple trials, and have been used successfully for diabetic foot ulcers, venous leg ulcers. Next slide, please. They were designed and studied for less frequent application. Current graft recommendations for applications are approximately reapplication to every 3 to 4 weeks as needed. There has been evidence shown that the graft may still be visibly present in the wound at 3 to 4 weeks. This allows for longer period of time in between grafting as compared to some of the other amniotic grafts. Next slide, please. There are multiple published studies that support treatment with the 4 applications. Both studies show more than 75% complete epithelialization of treatment with an average of 13.8 or 16 weeks, with application of a variation of 1.24 to 1.6 grafts. The important thing is the complete epithelialization of the wound. Next slide, please. These grafts were developed and studied specifically for less frequent application. They have been used this way for many years. Again, they have been used in corneal ulcerations. The product application guides are consistent with avoiding manipulation of the graft, leaving it in place for 3 to 4 weeks. Published studies show significant real-world outcomes with an average of 2 grafts over 12 weeks. This product should fall into the guidelines of 12-week application. But along those lines, I agree that with Dr. Rader's presentation, I'm speaking not as a place, I have no financial things. I'm speaking literally as a practitioner who practices in a 4-physician practice, independently owned, not affiliated with any hospital or other wound care association. And, you know, those of us who are quote unquote in the trenches that are seeing this every day know that we need an armamentarium of products in order to get our patients healed. Personally, in my practice, I've used this on a patient who had a CMT, which consistently re-ulcerated out. Once I used this product, it was able to increase the subcutaneous tissue levels as well as heal the ulceration, and we have had no new ulcerations since that time. I've used it on patients who've had guillotine TMA amputations that were not healed after months, that were able to get those healed and return those patients to activity that would otherwise be facing BKAs. As I was preparing for today's talk, I did have our biller actually run some numbers, and for a period of time, due to financial reasons of getting grafts, making sure that they were approved for in-office use, we had stopped grafting for a period of time. During that time, our amputation rate had actually increased. We're taking these patients currently to the hospital for graft applications, which also significantly increases patient and insurance costs for hospital application as opposed to in-office use. I agree also with what Dr. Rader said previously, as far as you cannot limit innovation in these products. I've been around since, you know, all we had was Apigraft, when Apigraft first came about when I was a resident, and I am just amazed at how each product gets better and better. It's that way with every aspect of our lives, from things that we use in the home, to medical care, to medical treatment, to medical procedures, to some of the screws and plates that we use. You can't only cover products that were previously there. You can't limit imitation, and physicians to be allowed to use their medical judgment based on research and some of these studies that are coming out in products. We're only trying to help our patients. And I believe that is it.
Thank you, Dr. Schoening. Can we circle back to Dr. Serrana now?
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. May Dr. Serrana present for Skin Labs and state any conflict of interest. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Thomas Serena. I'm a board-certified surgeon. I've done wound care for 30 years. Today, I'm here representing Serena Group Research, which is my physician-owned contract research organization. I'm also representing Stim Labs, for whom I'm doing a IRB-approved clinical trial that's very unique, and I think it's something that the MACs will be very interested in. I'm also here, obviously, representing my patients. So first of all, I would like to congratulate the MACs for using an evidence-based algorithm to decide on coverage. I could not have been more pleased to see that was how we're going to go forward, moving forward. In any event, I have a couple comments about that, since my whole life is basically now clinical trials. And the first one is that I just want to make a comment, and that is that these diabetic foot ulcer trials and venous leg ulcer trials do really advance the science. And several of the other speakers are talking about advancing the science, but they really do, because we don't just study a product. For example, in the STEM labs, we're studying 4 of their products at the same time. And for the first time, we'll be using a unique trial design called a platform design. And it's the support of STEM labs that's made that possible. Platforms are widely used in other areas of medicine. I'm sure many of you know the oncologists have embraced this design, but it allows us to compare multiple products at the same time using a common control group. And for the skin substitute products, this may well be the most revolutionary of all new trials. Again, sponsored by STEM Labs, and they're benefiting by getting their product approved. We are benefiting as scientists and researchers and physicians as learning more about diabetic disease. In addition, STEM Labs has donated money in order for us to use continuous glucose monitoring in their trial. CGM has never been used in a diabetic foot ulcer trial, surprisingly. Yet we know that hemoglobin A1Cs are not very accurate in determining whether the patient will heal or not. And but in microvascular complications and other aspects of diabetes, such as retinopathy and nephropathy, neuropathy, we know that the time in range, the time a patient spends between 70 and 180, makes all the difference in the world on microvascular complications. Thanks to STEM Labs and their sponsorship of their trial, we will be able to study CGMs for the first time in studying diabetic foot ulcers. Again, I applaud the MACs for choosing an evidence-based approach, because it will not only just help products get approval, it will help us advance the science of wound healing for our diabetic patients and other patients with hard to heal wounds. The trial design is really trial design is one of my whole lives, and we have a number of protocols. We publish all of our protocols, and I've already sent one of our protocol designs to in the written comments. I'm more than happy to send all of them if you want to read them all. But we make them publicly available either on clinicaltrials.gov or in peer-reviewed publications, so that as the MACs are looking for trial designs and looking for a guidance on what should a trial look like in order to get reimbursement, that work's been done, and it's been published in peer-reviewed journals. And I would welcome everyone to have a look at those. Happy to share any of our information that we have with the group. In addition, there are a lot of companies out there that are starting trials, and we're starting clinical trials before this designation came up, or this draft LCD came up. For example, STEM Labs, we had been talking since January about the clinical trial, and we're expecting IRB approval this week, actually today, for that matter, for their clinical trial. If a company has an IRB approved protocol and is registered on clinicaltrials.gov, I would like to suggest as an option that the MACs consider giving a grace period for them to collect that data and publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. The grace period will serve several purposes. First of all, the companies have already made a commitment to gathering the evidence. And secondly, we've heard today by other speakers talk about access to products. Well, if the products that are gathering evidence have a grace period, then those products will be available, and the access issue really goes away. So those that are doing doing the work that we want them to do, contributing to science and getting their products evidence base behind their products, will then be allowed to continue selling while they gather that evidence. And I don't have suggestions on a time frame, but I'm sure that WPS can come up with that. Happy to help in any way in that regard. Next is the 4 applications. I will tell you how we practice in our group. We apply 4 applications to the patient. If the patient hasn't healed by 40% in 4 weeks, that's 4 applications, then we discontinue the use. We go back and look at the patient. Is it a perfusion issue? Is it a bacterial issue? What's going on? And that's how we approach it. We don't just continue if the wound's not responding. And I think that mirrors somewhat what we're seeing in the LCD. I would suggest I'm not a huge fan of the modifier as a solution, but I am a fan of saying if you apply 4 times and the wound is healed by 40%, that you can continue as long as you continue to have that same healing trajectory. Every 4-week time frame would have a 40% healing threshold for both diabetic and venous leg ulcerations. And I think again, that's how we already practice, and it works very, very well for us. We find that the patients have much higher healing rates. I know that the MolecuLite has also presented here. We also use that device for fluorescence imaging to look for bacterial fluorescence prior to applying, because we're going to get better results. Again, we get to that 4 weeks and 40% much more rapidly, get to much towards a healing as well. So again, I want to thank you very much for allowing me to present here, and I would certainly make myself available if you have any other further questions regarding what we do every day, and that's randomized controlled clinical trials and the new master trial designs, such as platform, umbrella, and umbrella trials that we are now adopting into the wound care space, which fit this space incredibly well, allow for large numbers of products to be studied at the same time. And with that, I'll thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serena. We appreciate your presentation and your commitment to the Medicare program and our patients. May Dr. Woody Vitale present in behalf of BioTissues. Oh. Okay, sorry.
Dr. Woody Vitale has already presented. We're on to Dr. Mina Data now.
Okay,
and I'm
sorry
trying to
about
pull
that.
up that PDF.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for that. Would Dr. Data please present on behalf of Organogenesis? Thank you for that, Rich.
I apologize. I'm trying to get Dr. Data unmuted. Let me just find that. Dr. Data is here on the telephone.
Don't worry, Rich. I certainly understand technical issues.
Okay, I've sent a request to unmute you, Dr. Data. I don't know how it comes through on your phone at your end. There we go.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today regarding this draft LCD. I'm actually not a physician. My name is Mina Datta. I'm a partner at Sibley Austin, and I represent Organogenesis. And I filed my conflict disclosure form. We wanted to begin by applauding the evidence-based approach reflected in the LCD. We'll have more to say about that in our comment letter, but in our time today, we focus on 5 recommended changes to the draft LCD. These recommended changes are important to strengthen the draft LCD's evidence-based approach and provide safeguards for appropriate patient access to medically necessary care. First, any final LCD should recognize that favorable real-world evidence, or RWE, constitutes quality data demonstrating a product's safety, efficacy, and positive clinical outcomes. FDA, NIH, and a significant body of medical literature recognize that RWE constitutes quality supporting evidence. Importantly, RWE addresses health disparities as it demonstrates efficacy and patient outcomes in populations that are often underrepresented in randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. RWE captures how care is administered to patients, which is often missing from the highly controlled environment of an RCT. RWE includes data from registries, health records, and other sources, and leverages claims data to evaluate the impact of treatments in clinical practice. Accordingly, any final LCD should cover products that have sufficient RWE support. Moving to my second point, any final LCD should specify clear criteria regarding the data and evidence required for a product to be covered under the LCD. A lack of clear criteria creates confusion. And consistent with our first recommendation, the criteria in any final LCD should specify that the evidence supports coverage when sufficient RCT data or RWE is available. Moving to my third point, any final LCD must expressly provide a process to ensure timely review of additional data and prompt implementation of coverage within 30 days following submission to the MAC of evidence sufficient for coverage. Right now, the draft LCD does not address whether and how coverage updates will occur, and failure to do so is problematic as it would create significant patient access issues and undue delays. Moving to my fourth point, the number of permitted applications should be increased under any final LCD to ensure appropriate and medically necessary care for all patients, including those with large or complex wounds, who are among the sickest and most vulnerable patients in our healthcare system. Failure to do so would result in denying medically necessary care to patients and exacerbating harmful health disparities in this space. Notably, the draft LCD itself recognizes the significant problem of health disparities that already exist in the area of wound care. Any final LCD should take steps to mitigate this problem, not aggravate it. Moving to my final point, appropriate implementation timing is critically important to address any final LCD's impact on patient access. Any final LCD should have a notice period of 1 year to ensure patients and providers can adjust to coverage changes. The proposed LCD would eliminate coverage for over 90% of the products currently covered in the skin substitutes market, which would significantly affect capacity and supply, as well as patient access to needed care. A 1 year notice period would help ensure an appropriate amount of time for provider education and for manufacturers of covered products to ramp up production to meet patients' needs. With those 5 key points in mind, we look forward to following up further with our comment letter. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your comments. And just want to make note again that the policy intentionally does not limit consideration for coverage to randomized controlled trials or for a specific study design. Our intent is to allow investigators multiple options for future investigations. So we purposely did not limit that to randomized controlled trials. But I really appreciate your presentation. Let's continue and let Dr. Televac present the next presentation.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there you go. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. And again, I want to reiterate the push towards evidence-based medicine is exactly what we need in this field. But again, we're going to be talking, as we have on skin substitutes or CTPs. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my background, I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer for Restorix Health, as well as a mobile wound care company called Onsite Advanced Care. The experience for me, I've been in wound care for over 23 years. I've been practicing infectious diseases for over 30 years. I'm currently the president of the American Professional Wound Care Association, and even sit on the advisory panel for CMS for outpatient payment determination, or even what would be covered, and chair of the data subcommittee. And I've had the opportunity to teach folks as being program director at Duke University and still hold several appointments in both the podiatric realm and the medicine realm. So next. Yeah, so I wanted to first touch on the limit on the applications. We do have a modifier that I think is a little bit problematic because of it needs to be clarified, and we'll touch on that. But again, if you're going to be using, say, a modifier as a metric to measure who's going over 4, then you're going to be getting a metric that becomes meaningless. Then literally everyone who goes has to go over 4, because when you look at the data that this was derived from, in fact, I was the co-author, or I wrote this paper and was co-author of the Medicare paper with Armstrong, was author as well on this. When you look at that data, as well as the RCT data of past studies, when you look at 4 applications within a 12-week period, it is not statistically significant. You really do not see evidence of impact until you get to 6 or greater on this. And again, the 4 applications don't align with, say, a 12-week treatment course, because that's going out 3 weeks. And Medicare data shows that out of 1 to 2 or 3 weeks to 3 weeks is actually the worst outcomes you could get within the application or routine applications. Next. Now, this is just looking at RCTs in the past, going from just a handful, but you can see the majority of these is greater than 4. In fact, none of them land on 4. And when you look at the Medicare data, where you're looking at 10 million, almost 10 million or 10 million data points, this data, which you are which you have used in the to determine this, is following patients out a year. It's not following patients at 12 weeks. So you cannot marry the two by just picking a random average out of a retrospective Medicare big data set, and then saying, oh, most people do RCTs at 12 weeks. This logic doesn't work. So next. And this is just looking at that paper that was published in 2021, where we started out with close to 10 million patients. And then these folks are all propensity matched, they're in these matched groups. And the group that appears to have been pulled out of was the group 1, where it was used any which way possible, and really did not reflect best outcomes. And it's not really even the metrics that we advocate in its use. And you can see, though, if you were actually using 1 standard deviation, this would actually get you to 7 applications, and then you would have a statistically significant number, and at least an off-ramp point where you need to reevaluate that Dr. Serena stated. Next. Within that paper, if you look actually at the group where it's used the way it should be used, according to most of the instructions for use, then you're looking at an application where it goes at least to 5. And you can see here where you have greater reduction in minor amputations, major amputations, reduction in ED visits for those. The treatment length shortens up. And when you use 1 standard deviation, this really goes to 8. So 4 doesn't really work for anything. Next. Again, I already kind of stated on the fact that, the 6 weeks of wound care management that includes the weekly application, it doesn't, you don't get demonstrable improvement until you get to 6 weeks with weekly applications. And now with what we're faced with is 1 application every 3 weeks and 12 weeks doesn't work. It's not statistically significant when you analyze the data. Let's go next. This is another Medicare study where we had 80,000 plus episodes of care. We broke out what if you did weekly, saw the patient weekly and debrided and put on a skin substitute versus biweekly versus weekly. You can see that every indicator is improved, and the cost effectiveness goes up when this is a weekly application. So next. All right, the KX modifier. There's a couple things in here that's interesting and have been asked before that need clarification. Within the 12-week treatment episode, does that include the 30-day run-up period where you need to see if the patient's going to improve and not need it, or not improve, stall, and need it? So it would actually work better if that was part of what it was. Another part is site of service. It's hard to track where these applications are done. So I don't want to be treating my patient and they had a surgery where even the patient wasn't aware, but somehow it shows up say within the HOPD setting that there were 2 other applications in prior surgeries where now if I put 4 on, it's actually 6. I didn't use a KX modifier. Well, what happens there? And then you also talk about demonstrable improvement, but it doesn't at least give examples. It could state examples of improvement are, but not limited to, decreased surface area, reduction of wound volume, improved granulation. You know, these are things that I think are that everyone on 100% would agree on, and that at least giving an example allows for it always to be put in the note when it needs to be put in when it needs to be. And again, I also agree with the A1C. I'm going to back up just a little bit. We actually published a paper showing that when you look at restricting hyperbaric, or say the use of a skin substitute, there is actually, when you do a meta-analysis, there is absolutely
1 minute
no
remaining
study that shows that it inhibits wound care. It may slow it down, but that's where the skin sub comes in and overcomes that. Next. So again, there's some ICD-10s, the depth of is missing. So say like muscle and bone, there's examples where skin subs have been used, where flaps have not been an option in the reconstructive ladder, and that has been used to cover bone and granulation and actually create a limb salvage situation. Next. And again, I think there's some wording that needs to be clarified. You have in there that it's highly suggested to use a class 3 compression, which is 30 to 40 millimeters. If this actually could cause patient harm, if you highly recommend this, yet the ABIs are 1.2, 1.3, a lot of patients can't tolerate this, or you're compressing vessels that are non-compressible and it can create an ischemic event. This is where you have to make it that acceptable to use 20 to 30 or something, where like a Uniboot that really doesn't give any active compression.
I apologize. Your time is up.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you. I really appreciate your presentation. Just wanted to make a quick comment that, you know, in our LCD, an episode of skin replacement therapy is as defined 12 weeks from the first application of a skin substitute graft, but I will let the next presenter present. Rich?
Yes, it's Dr. Gunasekaran. He does not have a visual aid, so he will just be speaking.
Go ahead, doctor,
Sorry.
and thank you for presenting.
All right, let me see if I can figure out where they are, because I was in chat with them.
And while we wait, remember that we still have time until June the 8th to submit any additional comments, supporting literature before the end of the comment period. So thank you.
Okay, I can no longer locate Dr. Gunasekaran online, so we should probably move on to the next one and circle back.
I agree.
Subra.
Then, if Dr. Karen Ravitz is ready, could go ahead and present for the Coalition of Wound Care Manufacturers.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Ravitz. I'm the Healthcare Policy Advisor for the Coalition of Wound Care Manufacturers, and we appreciate WPS holding this hearing today. Founded in 2000, the coalition represents leading manufacturers of wound care products used by Medicare and commercially insured beneficiaries for the treatment of wounds, including cellular and/or tissue-based products for skin wounds or CTPs that are the subject of this policy. I have no conflicts of interest. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our feedback on the proposed LCD and accompanying LCA. The Coalition appreciates that the MAC adopted many of the changes recommended by the Coalition in our previously submitted comments, including but not limited to the ability for patients to obtain additional applications of CTPs when medically necessary and documented. There are many areas in which we believe clarification is necessary, but will provide those issues as well as more substantive comments on additional provisions contained in this draft policy in our written comments. But for the hearing today, I'd like to focus on 3 specific issues. First, while we fully support evidence-based policies, as others have identified on this call as well, more clarity is needed to better understand the evidentiary bar. For example, while it appears that the MACs are only providing coverage for products with RCT studies, there are several products that have RCT studies that are not covered. It also appears that only RCT studies that the MAC is accepting is for products that have applications within the policy parameters. The MAC has also indicated that coverage will be provided for CTPs having peer-reviewed published evidence, and yet there are products that have peer-reviewed evidence that are also not covered. There is no consistency in the evidence that is being accepted by the MAC, nor is there any transparency as to what metrics were utilized to review the evidence. While the MACs have identified GRADE as the methodology utilized to review the evidence, there are outputs based on the GRADE methodology that are missing. These outputs are important and should have been placed in the document, which would have helped inform stakeholders as to why certain studies were not accepted. Yet these outputs weren't included in the LCD or the LCA, and as such, we would request the MACs be more transparent in its criteria for product coverage and publish what is considered an adequate trial design and outcome to gain coverage, as well as the outputs from the evidence reviewed based on the GRADE methodology. We would also like to know when the MACs reviewed evidence for this policy, what was the cutoff date, as there are other studies, recent studies, that do not seem to be included in the evidentiary review for this draft policy. Second, we would also like to better understand the time frame and process a manufacturer will need to undertake when submitting evidence for consideration and what that process is. Does the manufacturer need to submit a reconsideration request in order for the MAC to review evidence for consideration of being placed on the Group 2 list? Or, since changes can usually be made to the LCA without going through notice and comment period and reopening the entire policy, which is why the LCA was established in the first place, that a manufacturer can simply submit their evidence for consideration and the MAC will review and place the product on the Group 2 covered list if the MAC deems that the evidence is satisfactory without going through the notice and comment period and reopening the entire LCD. If the latter, how long will it take for the MAC to review and make a decision for inclusion? Will the decision include the rationale for either not placing or placing the product on the Group 2 covered list? We raised this issue as in previous drafts, we've been told inconsistent messages and would appreciate clarity being provided. The Coalition recommends that the MACs follow the intention of the creation of the LCAs and allow for a manufacturer to submit studies for review without having to reopen the entire LCD for notice and comment. The Coalition also supports a comment made by Dr. Serena, not only in earlier previous meetings, open meetings, but also earlier today, that if a manufacturer is conducting clinical trials and it is registered on clinicaltrials.gov, there should be some provisional coverage for those products. Finally, we would like to ensure that all of the 15 codes and corresponding products listed in the Group 2 covered products list are available for coverage and reimbursement for both DFUs and VLUs. And I'm hopeful that you all will be able to confirm that during this call today. As mentioned, the Coalition will be submitting written comments with additional issues being addressed, and we thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate the your presentation. Since this is an evidence-based policy, all future evidence must be submitted through the LCD reconsideration process. Max cannot add new codes that expand coverage to billing and coding articles without going through the process. But all effort will be made to review new literature and codes in a timely manner. And so I see that there's the next presentation, so I'm not going to rob them of their time. So let's go to the Alliance of Wound Care Stakeholders, so they may provide their oral testimony. Please go ahead and present.
Terrific. Well, this is Shelley Ducker. I'm speaking on behalf of Marcia Neskart, who was unable to speak today. I'm speaking on her behalf. I'm the Director of Communications of the Alliance of Wound Care Stakeholders, and we thank you for the opportunity to provide some of our perspectives and concerns related to this LCD and LCA. The Alliance is a nonprofit multidisciplinary trade association of physician medical specialty societies and clinical associations. Our mission is to promote quality care and access to products and services for people with wounds. We do this through advocacy and educational outreach in the regulatory, legislative, and public arenas. And I just want to emphasize the statement today, as well as our comments and development, were written with the input of our Alliance Clinical Specialty Societies and multiple organizations that not only possess expert knowledge in complex chronic wound treatment, but also in wound care research. We have several concerns with the drafts that were released and we're going to flag a few areas that need further clarification. While much additional detail will be submitted in our written comments, today we're going to focus on three key issues. The first, the number of applications. So this proposed policy, as many have mentioned, does permit the 4 applications in a 12-week period, but now, as opposed to in last year's drafts, WPS is permitting additional applications and an extension of the 12-week period of time when medically necessary and documented in the patient file. The Alliance fully supports this proposed LCD language, permitting additional applications or an extension of the 12-week treatment period based on necessity with documentation provided in the medical record. We appreciate and support this clinically necessary and appropriate change from the previous drafts. Second, I want to focus on evidence. We support coverage based on evidence, and we've long been on the record supporting evidence-based medicine. However, as previously expressed on this call, we're concerned that WPS eliminated coverage for a significant majority of products on the market currently, and many of which do, in fact, have evidence to support their use. As such, we'd like to see WPS be clearer as to what was previously called here the evidentiary bar, right, that was applied. For example, there are studies that support products, but these products were eliminated from coverage, and there are studies and evidence available that were not identified or included on the list of evidence reviewed. So more information on this evidentiary bar and the recourse that manufacturers, clinicians, or researchers have with respect to evidence review would be appreciated and are needed. A key question that's come up several times, which we'll reiterate, is what's the process to submit evidence that has not been reviewed? I did hear at the beginning, you said, we have until June 8th for existing evidence, but of course, there's a larger question of new evidence that is in progress or will be forthcoming, more clarity needed on that process and that pathway. Finally, implementation. We'd like to urge WPS that once this policy is finalized internally and ready for release, that you consider that there be ample time to implement it, especially given the limits and restrictions on the commonly used products that are currently being removed. Many patients will be in the midst of treatment plans on products that might no longer be covered under the final policy. These treatment plans are standard 12 weeks, and of course, midway changes in mid-treatment plan can negatively impact patient care. Furthermore, facilities will need to go through a formulary review process of the products that are covered under the finalized LCD to determine how they need to add, adjust, or remove products from your formula from their formularies. This process, we're told, can take upwards of 8 months. So with these considerations in mind, we encourage WPS to ensure that there's enough time to implement the provisions of the LCD once finalized so as not to negatively impact patient care. We thank you for the opportunity to share this perspective. This concludes our remarks, and we will be submitting many additional details and perspectives in our written comments shortly.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate your comments, and I want to confirm that any literature that was not included in the evidence review or new literature that has been published can be submitted to WPS during the open comment period for consideration, and making note that literature must be published in a peer review journal. So continuing our presentation, let's go to Dr. Gunasekaran, that is now available and has some comments for us. Go ahead and please comment.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, loud
okay,
and
very
clear.
Good. Very good. Thanks again for letting me in. All of a sudden, my line got disconnected. My name is Subramanian Gunasekaran. I am the President CTO of Incol Corporation. I hold a PhD degree in biological sciences, and I'm also affiliated with the Society for Biomaterials over 40 years as an active member. In this scientific organization, I currently serve as a liaison as well as a program chair of the SIG, namely Biomaterials and Medical Products Commercialization. My technical experience includes, based on my interest in the expertise in the field of biomaterials, during the mid-90s, I have been involved with the FDA authorities to evaluate collagen-based biomaterials for their safety and effectiveness in device applications. As an example, I had the opportunity to inform FDA team about the technical impossibilities of producing type 1 collagen using recombinant methods. I also played a significant role in establishing ASTM for the surgical grade type 1 collagen that is republished in 2020. Furthermore, I have collaborated with Dr. Grace Picciolo, PhD of FDA in the industry and regulatory group meetings focusing on tissue engineered products. I have also worked alongside Dr. Eric Sussman of PhD of FDA through the Society for Biomaterials. Together, we have organized webinars to shed light on evaluating medical device based on scientific relevance of biochemical composition of the biomaterials. Moreover, I have also been instrumental in organizing a few panel discussions emphasizing the commercialization hurdles of biomaterial-based regenerative medical products to address challenges in the field. With all these expertise, I'm here to provide my perspective on the recent LCD proposal. I do admit I have a personal interest as a commercial product developer in understanding the scientific and technical relevance of the current proposed LCD. It is interesting to note that CMS and MACs have recently seemed to promote amniotic and placenta-based products as skin substitutes. The role of FDA to monitor the safety and efficacy of such medical devices is highly impaired compared to the routine market clearance of a medical device using 510K or PMA paths. During the last LCD proposal by Novitas, First Coast, CGS, MACs, it was decided to call for a TRG letter from FDA to properly recognize HCTP products. This decision was strongly objected by certain groups who argued that such decisions would dramatically affect patient care, leading to the cancellation of the whole proposal. Now there is another proposal by CGS, FCSO, NGS, Noridian, Novitas, Palmetto, WPS, that totally removes the need for TRG letter. However, it includes only certain products based on their clinical study data. Unfortunately, such study data evaluation is adequately not guided by CMS. Please see certain observations that I want to bring it out, right? Disparities in clinical outcomes. Manufacturer-sponsored studies may not be relevant to accept, in my opinion. Several covered products clinical outcomes have been assessed under high risk categories, and I read through all the details of how they do that, and if one with the technical knowledge will understand that these studies may have to be reassessed for approving or disapproving. FDA involvement in the assessment of safety and efficacy should be mandated. The proposed LCD contains controversial statements that need to be clarified. No proper pre-announcement of the need of guidance of clinical studies provided to the manufacturers. So in conclusion, the list of investigators also used to evaluate the skin substitutes for treating chronic wounds by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, AHRQ, which has been adopted to include the products under the covered category, does not seem to be adequately qualified to assess the safety and efficacy of skin substitutes. This point is also very important as it is dictated in the section. I'm talking about the Social Security Act, section 1886E. All of the covered shortlisted products don't seem to have complete assessment of their safety, which is also mandated by the SSA. In order to provide a suggestive solution, CMS should give responsibility to assessing the safety and efficacy of each product to the FDA authorities instead of CMS taking over that role, in my opinion again. Until such process gets implemented, forcefully thrusting the proposed LCD would have a major setback on the commercial usage of most of the skin substitute products currently available in the market. Having said the above, another major flaw in the proposed LCD is the non-availability of a specific definition to conduct a clinical study to evaluate the effectiveness of skin substitutes in the proper management of diabetic ulcers and venous ulcers. Medicare should announce such guidelines for all the manufacturers and give adequate time for the manufacturers to perform such clinical studies through clinicaltrials.gov. What has been accomplished right now to declare only 15 products are covered and others are not is really a non-ethical and an improper approach, in my opinion. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your presentation. I want to remind those who made oral presentations that we would greatly appreciate if they can send us those comments in writing so we can truly address them on our comment response document. So continuing with the meeting, let's go now to Sophie Hafley, that is going to present on behalf of Medicare Access to Skin Substitute Coalition. Please go ahead and present.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Hafley, and I represent the Medicare Access to Skin Substitutes Coalition. The MASS Coalition is a group of skin substitute companies that are dedicated to ensuring access to critical wound care products. We are seriously concerned about the coverage policy set forth by WPS in this draft LCD. It is arbitrary and capricious, sets unclear standards, is inconsistent with the FDA regulatory framework for skin substitute products, and is bad for patient care. Next slide, please. First, it is important to recognize that the CGS, Novitas, and First Coast MACs issued very similar final LCDs in the summer of 2023. After the MASS Coalition and other stakeholders voiced their concerns with the policy in those LCDs to both the MACs and CMS, the MACs rescinded those final LCDs before they became effective. Here, not only did this MAC issue a draft LCD very similar to the ones that were rescinded, but all of the MACs throughout the country followed suit, effectively issuing a national coverage policy. Even after rescinding the final LCDs last year, the MACs did not obtain stakeholder input with regard to the new draft LCDs. No contractor advisory committee and no public meetings to obtain input on how to formulate a policy that works for the benefit of Medicare beneficiaries with chronic wounds were held. Instead, we have the same substantive policy that was rescinded last year, just packaged a bit differently. Next slide, please. The MAS Coalition products are HCTPs under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act. It is important to note that FDA would not consider HCTPs for amniotic or placental tissue products to be indicated for any purpose other than serving as a wound cover or barrier. FDA would not consider an HCTP to be appropriately described as functioning like a skin scaffold. Next slide, please. But the draft LCD adopts a definition of skin substitute that requires the product to be, quote, scaffolding for skin growth. This requirement is inconsistent with how FDA views HCTPs. Again, the FDA TRG would not issue a letter stating that an HCTP should function like a skin scaffold. The MAC cites the AMA codebook, but there is no clear rationale in the draft LCD regarding why the skin scaffold definition in the CPT codebook is relevant to a Medicare coverage determination. Next slide, please. The draft LCD proposes coverage for only 15 skin substitute products and puts over 200 products in the non-covered category. The reason why a product was put into a particular category is unclear. The proposed standard for clinical data is not clearly defined, and the skin scaffolding requirement is also not clearly defined. The distinction between covered and non-covered products is also arbitrary and capricious. For example, there are products in the covered category that arguably provide scaffolding for skin growth and other products that do not. Next slide, please. Regarding the 4-application utilization limitation, this was widely challenged in the final LCDs that were rescinded last year. Yet, for some reason, the MACs have proposed it again. Clinical experience shows that most large and complex wounds require more than 4 applications to completely heal. There is clinical data that is relied upon by the MACs to support coverage for certain products that use more than 4 applications to heal wounds. The authors of the primary study relied upon by the MACs to support the 4-application limit have stated that the MACs misinterpreted this study. Next slide, please. If this draft LCD is finalized as proposed, Medicare beneficiaries will suffer. It is unreasonable to expect that only 15 products can serve the entire Medicare population. Treatment of wounds will be delayed if treated at all. Medicare beneficiaries in vulnerable populations will be disproportionately affected. And although the draft LCD technically only applies to skin substitutes for diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers, at least one MAC has stated that skin substitutes for other wounds, specifically pressure ulcers, will be treated like dressings for purposes of reimbursement. This will completely devastate access to proven treatments for patients suffering from painful chronic wounds. Next slide, please. In summary, the draft LCD is legally defective and bad policy. The MAC should not finalize the draft LCD. Instead, WPS should take steps to obtain input from a wide variety of stakeholders before proceeding with a new coverage policy. Unlike this draft LCD, the new coverage policy should be well-reasoned and based on established data and clinical experience, establish clear and attainable parameters for coverage that are consistent with the FDA regulatory framework, and promote effective wound care for Medicare beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate your presentation. I want to make a comment that the current LCD, we took stakeholder input from the previous proposed LCD, and that input was strongly considered in the development of this proposed LCD. During that process, there were multiple stakeholder meetings as well as period public meetings, and that makes basically this LCD the logical outgrowth of the LCD development process that we have carried out right now following the Code of Federal Regulations and using the prior comments, and we will take very seriously your comments on this iteration of the LCD. I also want to clarify that there is no coverage avenue through FDA regulatory processes. It's only evidence-based, and the current LCD does not include the word scaffolding or use scaffolding as a requirement for coverage. Scaffolding just is a CPT code term that is used for billing and coding purposes and is used on the AMA CPT code book. And to be able to pay these services, we must pay the CPT code for the application of these services. And that's where the word scaffolding is used. That is part of the billing and coding requirements per CPT, but it's not really a coverage criteria for this LCD. I don't want to take time from the next presenter, so I will continue with the presentation. So will Dr. Matthew Ewan comment on our draft?
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our comments on behalf of Acera Surgical this afternoon. My name is Dr. Matthew McEwen. I am the Chief Science Officer at Acera Surgical, and we manufacture a synthetic skin substitute called Restrata Wound Matrix. Next slide, please. Here are my disclosures. Next slide. So today, I'm here on behalf of Acera Surgical to provide our comments on the proposed LCD. At a high level, Acera Surgical agrees with the intent of the draft LCD to support products with high quality clinical evidence. But particularly, we're here today to highlight that the analysis of available clinical evidence did not include a key peer-reviewed, published, level 1 randomized control trial that evaluated the use of our product Restrata in the treatment of chronic diabetic foot ulcers. This study, published by Khalid Hussein et al. In January of 2024, presents a low-risk level 1 clinical evidence similar to that of other products categorized as covered in Group 2. As a result, Acera Surgical would like to request that Restrata be categorized as covered under Group 2, as it is also supported by low-risk level 1 clinical evidence. Next slide, please. So for the purpose of some background, our product Restrata Wound Matrix is unique. It is a synthetic skin substitute that contains no human or animal tissue. Restrata is composed completely of synthetic resorbable submicron fibers that emulate the structure and architecture of native extracellular matrix and provide an optimal construct to support cell ingrowth, new tissue formation, and wound healing. Restrata was cleared by the FDA in April of 2017, granted a C1849 code in 2020, and then a product-specific code of A2007 in 2022. Next slide, please. Unlike other harvested animal-based or human-based tissue products, Restrata is completely engineered from synthetic materials using a unique technology called electrospinning. This technology allows us to make subcellular polymeric fibers that emulate the non-woven fibrillar architecture of native ECM and provide a matrix that is similar to human ECM and optimal for the promotion of wound healing, particularly in chronic diabetic ulcers. Next slide, please. Next slide. Given its unique synthetic design, can you go back one, please? So given its unique synthetic design, Restrada has a different mechanism of action than other human-based or animal-based tissue products. It provides an optimal matrix to support cell ingrowth, tissue formation, and complete wound healing. It's also supported by level 1 clinical evidence, as we'll talk about in the next slide. Because it's synthetic, it's resistant to enzymatic degradation and holds up very well to moisture. It's terminally sterilized, and because there's no human or animal tissue, it's a unique alternative in patient populations who might be sensitive to the use of human or animal components. Next slide, please. So specifically, we're here today to highlight a peer-reviewed published study that was published in January of 2024 by Khalid Hussein in the Foot and Ankle Surgery Journal that highlights a prospective, randomized, blinded, parallel arm controlled trial that evaluated the comparative efficacy of Restrada as compared to standard of care in the treatment of chronic diabetic foot ulcers. As I mentioned, the analysis of clinical evidence that was performed did not include this study, and so we want to make sure to highlight this publication in WPS's analysis. So specifically, this study was powered or was properly powered by the results of a multi-center, single-armed prospective pilot study completed in 2021 by Abek et al., which demonstrated complete closure of diabetic foot ulcers at the rate of about 75% of treated wounds over the course of 12 weeks. Based on this study design, 60 subjects were screened in this study with diabetic foot ulcers in the range of 1 to 30 square centimeters, who were then put through a 2-week run-in period. 46 of these subjects were then enrolled and randomized 1-to-1 to receive either Restrada or standard of care for up to a 12-week period. And what's unique about this study is that only 2 subjects were lost to follow-up, so the clinical outcomes of the majority of patients were included in the ITT and PP analyses. Next slide, please. In terms of the outcomes of this study really demonstrated that the clinical efficacy of Restrada is comparable to that of other products listed as covered in Group 2. Restrada demonstrated in this study a complete closure of 74% of treated diabetic foot ulcers, which was shown to be statistically superior to the standard of care group, which elicited 33% complete closure. This study also showed that Restrada was statistically superior to standard of care in persistence of wound closure and time to complete wound healing. So again, this study demonstrates some unique clinical efficacy of Restrada comparable to that of other products listed as covered in Group 2. Next slide, please. So overall, we believe that this published, peer-reviewed level 1 clinical study demonstrates comparable characteristics to other clinical evidence supporting products that were listed as covered under Group 2. And as a result, Restrada is supported by similar quality of level 1 clinical evidence. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, again, we want to make sure that we include this recent published peer-reviewed study in the clinical analysis of available clinical evidence. We want to highlight that we believe that Restrada should be categorized as covered under Group 2, as again, it also is supported by low-risk level 1 clinical evidence comparable to other products in that category. And then finally, Acera Surgical would also like to urge that non-coverage of a synthetic skin substitute like Restrada would discriminate against patients with religious, cultural, and ethical objections to either human or animal cellular or tissue products. Next slide. So with that, I would just like to thank you all for your time and would say that we will be submitting our written comments and would be glad to take any questions if there are any at this time.
There's not a question, but I do have a request. I would greatly appreciate if you could send us a copy of the article that you made reference on your presentation to WPS before the end of the comment period. That would be very helpful. And I greatly appreciate your presentation and commitment to the Medicare program. Thank you.
Thank you. We will we'll submit that publication to you all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. So now I would like to give an opportunity to Jenny Fight to present and comment on our proposed LCD. Please go ahead and present.
Hi, my name is Dr. Teresa.
Doctor, I cannot hear you. I lost your audio. Go ahead and present, please.
This is Dr. Hughes. Is that who you want to present?
Sorry, this is Jenny. I see you have my presentation up, or if Dr. Hughes is next, I can follow whatever is best.
Oh, sorry about that. No. Let's, okay, my apologies. Please, Dr. Hughes, one of our STEAM CAC members, she wants to comment on our LCD. Go ahead and present. Sorry about that, doctor.
So Dr. Hughes, if you want to comment, and then Jenny Fight after Dr. Hughes.
Great, thank you. My name is Dr. Teresa Hughes. I am the CAC representative here for IPMS and J5, and I'm speaking on behalf of the J5 and J8 CACs. Just a couple of comments that we wanted to bring up. First of all, we wanted to say that we appreciate the use of evidence-based LCD. We support all the required elements of the standard of care of both the diabetic foot ulcers and the venous leg ulcers. We do appreciate and support the use in exceptional cases in which 4 applications is not sufficient for wound healing, that additional applications may be considered with documentation. We appreciate and support the ability to use the KX modifier when medically necessary. And we also appreciate and support the uniformity of all 7 Part B MACs, aligning on the use of the JZ and JW modifiers with this service. A couple of points that we wanted to bring up. We had concerns about the policy limiting only to diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers and leaving all other indications up to medical necessity. We feel this creates ambiguity and confusion. We would ask for clarification with the MACs to apply rigid, if they're going to apply the rigid guidelines of this policy to the non-diabetic foot ulcers and the venous leg ulcers as well. Another point that we would bring up, one requirement under the covered indication states that standard of care measures without measurable signs of healing must have preceded the application for a minimum of 4 weeks. We find the word measurable problematic. As an example, if 80 square centimeter venous leg ulcer decreases in size by 1% after 4 weeks of standard care, that is a measurable sign of healing. But we feel that's not consistent with the spirit of this proposed policy. Multiple other areas of the proposal use the words failure to respond, which we feel is more appropriate. We have another issue with the wording. In the proposed LCD, it refers to coverage requiring failure to respond to 4 weeks of standard therapy. However, the proposed LCA refers to coverage requiring ulcers healing that has stalled with standard ulcer care treatment of greater than 30 days. 4 weeks and 30 days are not the same, and we would ask that we reconcile to make these consistent. Limitation number 3 in the proposal LCD states, unsuccessful therapy also includes recurrence of the ulcer in the same location within 12 months from initial application. Recurrence of both diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers is extraordinarily common. The limitation limits patients' access to care. If an ulcer heals with advanced care and then recurs 8 months later, there's no reason to restrict that patient's access to the care that they need, care that has already been proven to be effective for that patient. Another point we have is under evidence-based guidelines for standard of care, it states, a comprehensive assessment of patients and their ulcers will also facilitate appropriate care by identifying and correcting systemic causes of impaired healing. We agree that identifying and addressing underlying contributing comorbid conditions is an essential element of wound healing. However, the word correcting is concerning. We would like to see this wording changed from correcting to optimizing. In many cases, the wound care provider cannot correct systemic pathologies that contribute to impaired healing. Diabetes is an excellent example. Diabetes can be well controlled and optimized, but in most cases, by definition, it cannot be corrected. Another point that we have is under the evidence-based guidelines for skin substitute grafts, it states, for venous leg ulcers, if substantial ulcer improvement is not demonstrated after a minimum of 4 weeks of standard therapy, skin substitute grafts, or CTP, may be considered in addition to compression therapy. Substantial ulcer improvement is never further defined, and we fear this may lead to unintended consequences in the form of ambiguity. The diabetic foot ulcer literature refers to 50% reduction in size after 4 weeks of conservative therapy, and a similar measurable criteria for venous leg ulcers would help avoid the ambiguity. And then the last thing, as a point that was already brought up earlier by Shelley, the implementation, we would like to see that after an LCD is published, that we look at that implementation guideline so physicians have a chance to use any products that they may have on hand, as well as patients that are already in their treatment protocol, that they can finish up the treatment that they're already ongoing. We will be sending and submitting these points and policies to the WPS for further consideration.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your presentation and your commitment as a CAC member. Thank you for being part of our advisory committee. Just wanted to make note that yes, this policy addresses the diabetic foot ulcers and venous ulcers, and the use of skin substitutes or CTPs outside of this diagnosis are under MAC discretion. So just making to reassure you of that particular point. So let's go to our last presentation. Please now go ahead and present, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schoening, and I want to thank all the MACs for not just the open LCD or the draft LCD, but also the coordination to get all the speakers in order. I know I've had back and forth with all the MACs, and it's been very helpful. Next slide. So just a little bit about me. I'm not a clinician. I'm not speaking today. As a clinician, I am a certified coder, auditor, and certified coding instructor, and I've been employed in wound care reimbursement and health policy in different parts of the revenue cycle for the over 20 years. Next slide. We do want to really commend the MACs on what we see as great progress with the intent to provide equal evidence thresholds for product coverage. We are aware, based on the open meetings that have occurred so far, that everyone is declining to pin that down to a certain RCT or real world evidence, but we still appreciate that each product is looked at individually. We are also really heartened that there's a pathway for treatment of patients that may require 4 applications, which was one of our primary concerns as well as a lot of stakeholders, as you know. We do have different topics that we are going to provide written comments on as well. There are some areas of the LCD where we do have strong concerns, and we believe can be the LCD can be strengthened by addressing. Next slide. Okay, so again, we are pleased that there's a consistent look at products regardless of path through the FDA. We are also pleased that the MACs looked closely at AHRQ as a United States Health and Human Services department, and seem to take to heart that due to processing variations, as the ARC report says, each of these products must be studied in a properly conducted clinical trial. And so we support the transparent and consistently applied clinical evidence requirements, even if they are not overtly stated, and give the option for different kinds of data to come in. The concern that we have, and not to reiterate too much what other presenters have said, is that there's it's obvious at this point that things will have to go through a reconsideration level. We are concerned with the fact that this was rolled out as local coverage determinations, which implies a MAC by MAC process and reconsideration, which can be extremely time consuming, and that it's just a very, very resource driven process. And so we would request that the process could be made jointly across all MACs, so that we don't see unequal coverage for what is essentially a national policy. Next slide. Okay. Again, we're pleased that there's a path forward for greater than 4 applications. We do think that, per what Dr. Tettelbach was saying, different kinds of progress could be noted to strengthen the document, but we do believe it requires, the LCDs do provide thresholds and documentation requirements. However, there are currently 4+ big data studies, and currently the LCD reviewed only 1. And we do believe that these very important documents that Dr. Tettelbach and others were authors on support a higher threshold than 4 applications to mark the exceptional cases. And what we strongly recommend is that the MACs consider that applying more than 4 applications should not create undue administrative burden or lack of access. Next slide. So we do have overall support for the KX modifier if it is used as an informational modifier to allow post-payment documentation spot checks or to monitor utilization trends in such a way that might inform future policies. But we strongly caution that the KX modifier will not work if it's used as any kind of surrogate prior authorization process. For example, if ADRs are generated for the majority or all of the claims, or if it functions as some sort of post-service but prepayment review. And on the CGS listening session last year, which was very good and a lot of good input from lots of clinicians, they correctly called out that the MACs are not equipped to handle a volume of any sort of prior authorization process or post-payment review. And we would say this is especially the case with the line for exceptional cases drawn at 4. And we would also remind that skin substitutes are buy and bill. Practices cannot routinely absorb the cost represented by a lengthy appeal or review processes. Next slide. We also noticed the discrepancy between the summary of evidence section in the LCD and the billing and coding article. And we, as such, have providers interpreting it in 2 completely different ways. So right now, one group is considering the covered products are only covered per the evidence table within the proposed LCD, and then the others are going by the article. And clarification is really needed here because it's not just the providers, but it's the Medicare Advantage plans and other review entities and auditors. And the last thing we want to do is to see a provider get dinged because they misinterpreted the intent here. Next slide. We have, like others, have strong concerns regarding the ICD-10 Group 1 list. Currently, there is nothing with a .622 suffix for the diabetes codes. And so as written, there is no coverage for diabetic foot ulcers, even as high as the ankle, because ankle ulcers map to that 622 suffix. But perhaps most concerning is that right now, the diagnoses capture only the most shallow ulcers, and we know that patients with deeper ulcers can benefit from skin substitutes. And I would come back to the fact that, again, the MACs only looked at the first of the big data studies, even though the MACs cannot consider cost as part of their decision-making. Those studies were not just health economics, they were about clinical... remaining. Sure. They were about clinical outcomes. And so there were a lot of clinical metrics and outcomes within those studies that should be taken into account. And none of those big data papers excluded deeper ulcers. And therefore, they can function as corroborating evidence to the RCTs that exist. And I'll just end with the ICD-10 implications, if it's not done right, could be really catastrophic to patient access. And, even if the intent of the MAC is one thing, if there's confusion, it could be just as problematic. And we register this as a strong concern. And I'll end there. Thank you so much for your time and appreciate the opportunity.
And I greatly appreciate your presentation. Just want to make note that any literature that is submitted before the end of the comment period is going to be taken into consideration during the finalization process of this document and on the comment response document. So that's the importance of providing all literature that you feel was not included in our proposed LCD and send it to the MACs before the end of the comment period on June 8th, as well as your written comments, so we may address them in our process while we finalize the LCD and place it for notice. I think you were the last presenter. I just want to thank all the presenters for making this a great open meeting and for your interest in our Medicare beneficiaries and the Medicare program. We want to work with you to provide the best evidence-based care to our beneficiaries. And from your presentations, I think that the presenters were on the same page as the MAC. So we greatly appreciate your time and commitment to the improvement of outcomes of your patients and our beneficiaries. So if there are no additional things for time constraints, I'm going to then adjourn the meeting today, May 22nd, 2024 at 3:04 Central Time. Have a beautiful day. Greatly appreciate all of you. Thank you.